I'm Goldie Poblador, and I'm a sculptor that works in interactive installation art, and I work in scent and glass.
Hello, I'm Chris Stafford, and this is AART, the podcast where we get up close and personal as we get to know women from around the world of visual arts. This is Season 2, Episode 37. My guest this week is the Filipino artist Goldie Poblador, who works in scent and glass interactive installation art. Goldie specialises in glass frameworking combined with performance, video, installation and scent, embodying themes of feminism, the environment and decolonisation as it relates to the body. Goldie was born in Manila in the Philippines in 1987. Her parents, Napoleon Poblador, was a lawyer and painter, and Gisela Poblador is a homemaker who had earlier studied dentistry. Goldie is the eldest of 4 children. She has 3 younger brothers. She was, she says, an imaginative child who enjoyed creating worlds and performing. Her parents exposed her to art and music. She visited art shows, galleries and museums, learned the piano and performed in a drama club. By the age of 18, Goldie was performing in a punk band. That's something she likes to recreate today for fun. But it was her fascination with glass and painting that would steer her through college. She graduated from the University of the Philippines in 2009 with a BFA in studio art, and later with an MFA glass from the Rhode Island School of Design. Between colleges, Goldie was introduced to the Scuola Abate Zanatti in Murano, Italy. She also worked as an artist and attended the Pilchuck Glass School in Seattle, Washington, co-founded by the renowned glass sculptor Dale Chihuly. Goldie has been exhibited internationally at such institutions as the Yangon Secretariat Building Knockdown Centre, Cementi Art House, Singapore Art Museum, Bangkok Art and Culture Centre, the Fine Art Museum of Hanoi, and the Culture Centre of the Philippines. She is currently working on a show for the Art Fair in the Philippines in 2025. Goldie is married to Joseph Souza, and the couple live in New York City. Goldie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Your family is from the Philippines, but you've made the US your home.
I have. I grew up in Manila, Philippines, which is, the country's capital. Big city, noisy, lots of lights. It's great. It's great. But now I live in New York, and I see the similarities between Manila and New York, which is probably why I've stayed. Yeah.
But it suits what you're doing now as an artist. You mentioned in installations, but working in glass. Beautiful, beautiful glass work, Goldie. How long have you considered yourself to be a glass artist doing exactly what you're doing now?
Well, I first started glass blowing when I was it's been a while, so you'll have to forgive me if I get like the ages wrong, but I think I was around 22. So that was in 2009, 15 years ago. And I first started glass sculpting. I learned from a scientific glass blower in a tiny, tiny shop, which was also a parlor, like a salon where people get haircut. And it was hidden in the back of the salon. But there was a sign that said scientific glass blowing. Chemistry sets can be made in places like this. And glass, for those of you who don't know, it's not the most available medium in the Philippines. But at the time, I was an undergraduate studying painting, and I wanted to create a perfume bar since during this year of 2009, a typhoon happened where I was from. And, the river water rose, and it was quite a horrible typhoon. And I wanted to work with the sense of smell, since like the town where I grew up was completely ravaged, and I became transfixed with this idea of preservation, like preserving memories and like what that would look like. And so I researched that smell is our sense that's most connected to that part of our brain that, remembers. And it's the part of our brain that, feels and, stores memories. So I thought it would be interesting to work with a medium like scent and what that would look like to paint with scent. And that's how I ended up where I am today. Somehow it's been a long journey of learning how to work with glass and working with scent. I'd say I'm still a beginner in many ways. I'm still learning. I'm still a student.
What made you curious about that particular approach to it, Goldie, which is unique?
I was researching a lot about memory first and foremost, and like how, memory is stored. Sometimes we have memories that are lost to us, but then scent brings it back, like memories from childhood. And when I watched like the village where I grew up, it's a subdivision called Monte Vista. And, I had these deep memories, like memories of, let's say, a dragonfly, blue dragonflies that I would see flying around. And when I experienced the typhoon, I was like, oh, I found that memories were all of a sudden coming back to me. And I thought that it was curious, and I wanted to find a way to really tap into how to instigate those like hidden memories in people, primarily like for myself also, right? But then as I uncovered the science behind it, I thought that it would be interesting to work with something that's largely been unexplored. And, largely like even like the language for scent, it's hard to find like the descriptives for a lot of scents, right? And a topic as, there were so many topics that were like going through my head as I was working on the perfume bar many years ago. And a lot of it was like, a sense of loss, a sense of like, how do we get back what I remember we had from when I was really, really young, growing up in the Philippines. And a lot of it dealt with like scent, right? Like jasmine, the scent of jasmine. Manila is quite a humid place, and it's a very tropical place. So there were a lot of like plants and trees that I felt were lost when the typhoon happened. So all of these things going through my head, right? Like this sense of loss and the sense of like nostalgia made me really, really curious. And I had this idea that like the reason that the pollution happened, like the typhoon happened the way that it did. Well, it wasn't an idea, right? I had researched it, is that there was a shopping mall that was built right near the river where I grew up. And they dredged this river in order to build the mall. So the mall is actually standing like on top of soil that was put there that wasn't originally supposed to be there in the first place. And so I was quite angry at that, since I know that like, people that are in charge, right? People that are in charge of like, let's say where a mall gets built, they aren't exactly looking out for things like the beauty of a river, right? Like the beauty of like the lives of the people that grew up like next to this river. And I had grown up next to this river and watched it degrade through time. So I thought it would be an interesting idea to like have the work look like something that exists in a mall, right? Like, what did we trade? I was thinking like, what did we trade for this ecological balance, for this to occur, right? And it was in my head like, oh, we traded it for this like commercial enterprise, right? So I thought it would be interesting to have the message of my disappointment like masked behind this concept of a perfume bar, which is like a commercial thing. It's something you find at a mall, and it's this highly luxurious thing that like feels in some way like unattainable, right? Or it's so luxurious because it's so hard to make. And this idea of glass, like glass in itself is a luxury. at least for me, right, growing up in the Philippines, glass sculpting is like, it was such like a foreign, mysterious thing to me when I started. So all of these things like scent and glass, they all seem to me like this concept of like luxury, and in itself is like, it's an art, right? Perfumery is an art, but also like it was a critique of perfumery itself, if that makes sense.
What age were you when the typhoon happened?
I think I was 22, like 21, 22.
And how did it impact you?
For some reason, this one impacted me a lot. I'll try and describe like what that felt like. Well, growing up in the Philippines means like you're used to storms, right? And by storms, I mean like storms that last for 5 days. Sometimes the power goes out, right? And somehow growing up in the Philippines, you get used to it in some way. Like it's always an inconvenience, but it's mostly an inconvenience for the very poor, right? And for some reason, this typhoon was located very close to where I lived. So the storm in itself, I think, lasted 3 days. And what happened was that the river water rose so high, it rose above the electric lines. So really, really high. And so my like where I grew up, my house was really close to all the universities, right? So I was lucky enough to be able to get home. And what's funny about where I live is that it's this little hill, and it was elevated, right? But then a lot of houses everywhere else were underneath water. And so, like I remember that my brother like was saying he had covered his legs in shopping bags, like plastic shopping bags, and he had taped it up, and they like walked through the river water to get home. But I think the most, like, I felt so affected the day after the storm had stopped. And I had left the village in a car, and I saw that the water was still high in certain places, and people were carrying their belongings. Like they had their belongings over their head, and they were carrying like what was precious to them. I remember someone was even carrying an electric fan. Like carrying a fan over their head, right? And I mean, a lot of people, sadly, like they passed away during this typhoon, right? And then like the days after the typhoon, right? Then we would start to hear the stories of like someone whose niece drowned, someone whose brother drowned. And then we got a call from someone who used to like be like someone who used to work for us, like begging us to help their children. Their children were stuck on the roof, right? So it's quite a big one. It was a big typhoon, and it was very close to where, I had lived my life, where I learned to bike. It was very close where I would go get vegetables, where we would pull out vegetables like for our dinner, and, to like walk out of the subdivision and then to see the vegetable garden gone, and to see, the electrical lines full of trash from the river was a really intense experience, I would say. And a lot of fish were like on the road, dead fish. It was just like, It felt like a painting in some way. It felt like Michelangelo's like Last Judgment in some way, like with the people and their belongings and just the trash. I felt quite affected. Yeah. And that's what inspired me.
Well, that would have been when you were studying your BFA in Studio Arts at the University of the Philippines anyway, wasn't it? 2009, I believe you graduated there.
Yes.
That was a very formative time for you, obviously, at the beginning of your adult life. What do you feel you took away from that on a social level, and also in terms of when you moved here, the culture that you were leaving behind, and the effects of that, and the devastation and so on that you knew could happen any time, and you've left family there too that are living through this potentially a very, very different environment to what you're living in now in New York.
Yeah, it's been a transition. I mean, I feel like I'm still going through that transition. Um, well, definitely, like I know that me and my family are lucky, right? That we, we have the means to have like a stable home, and we were really lucky that our house was actually in an elevated street, right? But then I know that the reality for a lot of Filipinos is living in uncertainty, especially, and it's uncertainty that is not like the choice of any human being, it's Mother Nature, right? But then what had me thinking a lot was just like, what were the choices made by my community that, what were those choices that could have like prevented what happened, right? Like that was going through my head a lot. And, socially, like moving to the United States, let's say, like translating this experience for people, it takes a while. I realized that like, I mean, growing up, I thought it was like quite normal. It's like, oh yeah, there's a typhoon, and then, we have a typhoon for 5 days and it's really, really strong, and some people's houses get blown away and then, and that happens. But then I realized, oh, that doesn't really happen here. It did happen, right? Hurricane Katrina happened in, how long ago was that? Like not too long ago. So, I mean, it does happen here, but it's still quite different. I think the frequency in which it happens in the Philippines is different. It happens way more often. And, I mean, a lot of what happens after is, people try to raise funds, raise awareness, and sometimes that helps. But I feel like real change, and even then as a young girl, like I felt that change had to happen, like real awareness in terms of what was happening to the climate, right? What was happening to the environment. So that's been sort of a focus of mine. And, I still feel the same way, like after all these years. When I recall the typhoon, I still feel a certain way, remembering it all. It's funny, like when here speaking, like I live in New York now, I feel like I live so far away. But then that was part of my frustration back then, thinking like, oh, how will I get people to care about this, right? Like obviously there are people who weren't affected, but how do you bring people close to what I felt after that typhoon? And I guess that's been a subject of my work, like for a while now. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I want to hear about that, and of course, your move to the US. But can we just go back to your earlier childhood a little bit and hear more about those early impressions? You were born in 1987. Your father Napoleon is a lawyer, and mother Gazella a housewife, and you have three siblings, so and all boys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, three brothers, three younger brothers. Only girl.
So what was early childhood like then for you? What are your earliest memories? What kind of things were you doing as a small child?
Well, my mom actually studied to be a dentist, interestingly enough. And, for young children, well, first it was the three of us, right? Me and my brothers that came right after me, we were all closer in age. So, childhood in the Philippines it was great. Like it was lovely. We would play outside. Although we did have typhoons and like blackouts, especially early in the 90s. The 90s were famous for having a lot of blackouts in the Philippines then. We played a lot outside, and a lot of my memories in nature were from that period. Like I remember catching dragonflies, like that was our game. And like we had we had blue ones and we had green ones and then there were red ones. And like we had like a ranking system for the dragonflies. Obviously we would set them free afterwards, right? But it was a lot of exploration in nature. I mean, you're a child, you're out in the playground a lot. And, not all things in nature are friendly, are good for you. So I remember like playing with plants that we call the makahiya, and it means shy, that they were very shy. And when you touch these plants, they would become smaller. And I remember playing with those plants a lot, but then also making the mistake of like touching a caterpillar. Right. But I remember being amazed by just like the shapes of these things and being interested in birds. I mean, when I was 3, my father was in grad school, so we lived in Boston, and I remember all the birds, right, being fascinated just by all the birds that were different from where I was from. And then we moved back to the Philippines, and a lot of my childhood, I remember, was spent like reading a lot and just like playing outside. And I feel like I still am the same in a lot of ways. Like I still enjoy spending my time outdoors and just being an observer of nature. And my parents, like they really loved art. Like my dad especially, and my mom loved music. So my mom, she made us take piano lessons. I remember when we were young, and my mom loved taking us to like art shows at galleries, and my dad loved museums and things like that. So just, I'm really fortunate like that my parents like gave us that environment that like encouraged us to think in a creative way or just to be inspired even.
Yeah, I'm sure. Did you paint as a child?
I think I read a lot. Oh, I remember not being very good at drawing, and it frustrated me when I was young. And so, I was always buying these books like Learn to Draw Characters or something. like I would always buy those like how-to guides for how to draw. And my dad was quite good at painting. He is a very talented painter. He still paints actually. And I remember like I had a cousin who was very good at drawing comics. And I just remember just feeling that desire of wanting to be able to do that. I definitely did not I was not the like gifted child at painting for sure. But I think that the desire was there. And that inspired me to just learn it throughout my life, like to learn to draw, to learn to paint. I think mostly what I was doing when I was very young was playing. Funny enough, like imagining things, right? Like I remember, like having all my toys set up, having a narrative for them, like building like worlds for them, and just really being into like worlds, like world building. Like I loved reading, right? So I loved like Narnia, the Chronicles of Narnia, and just like movies that had worlds, like worlds, fantasy worlds in some way. Like anything that looked colorful and interesting and like magical, I think I was into.
So you were very creative then as a child, very imaginative.
I think so. Yeah, that part I had. Yeah. Always in my head, like always in my head. That part I remember.
So you didn't capture the dragonflies then and start to draw them? Because I can imagine they might even feature in your glasswork. They're so beautiful.
Yeah, I've tried. Yeah, dragonflies are quite challenging. Their little legs. But maybe one day, their legs are so delicate. Yeah. But yeah, one day. Yeah.
What did you excel at school then, before high school, when you were first starting to explore the world of academia?
Oh, I think I excelled at English. Yeah, like reading. Definitely not at math. I excelled at the performing arts, I think. I was always in drama club. We had a drama club. I definitely wasn't the best actor or actress, but I remember being like a high energy kid. And so I loved like dancing, moving, running. Like I always had like energy somehow. And just being in front of an audience, I think I remember like being quite young and enjoying that feeling of performing. So I think those two things I excelled at. I think, one of the mischievous kids, like the Dennis the Menace type children. I was always asking like questions. My parents were always at the principal's office for sure. I was always up to no good. Yeah. One of those kids with excess energy, like they kind of think they're smarter than you, but they're not. That kind of kid.
I was thinking when you said you enjoyed building worlds and being, that sort of creative, imaginative, if it did lend itself to the performing arts, and it did. So would that have been possibly a future for you then in the performing arts?
Yeah, I mean, I always try to incorporate performance in my work somehow. It's not my biggest strength, I think. But then like currently I'm conceptualizing a performance that is trying to translate scent into music and all like trying to interpret like the species from a certain region in the Philippines. And I have done performance before. And yeah, when I was 18, I was in a punk band. So I've incorporated it somehow. I would say it's something I wish I were better at, but I've always tried to incorporate performance in my work, like something interactive.
Something interactive as an artist then, but not specifically as, say, a director or an actress, I was thinking.
Oh, yeah.
Would that have been a career path, or did you not even consider it?
Well, I mean, I don't think I ever considered it. It was never really an interest of mine. I was in drama club, right? I remember playing a hyena in Lion King and things like that. But then I was always more interested in the theater always plays its part. Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like the two worlds can't entirely be separated. Like when I do video pieces, like I did a video piece in 2021. And in that piece, I feel like I was playing two different characters. So somehow it spills over that part of my childhood.
And we're back with the Filipino glass artist Goldie Poblador. Is there then a part of you that has a need to perform? Do you see your art as essentially a performance?
I think so. That's a great question. Like sometimes I ask myself, like, is this part necessary? Because performing arts, like the performance in the visual arts, is quite difficult. You have to rehearse, and then you have to like work with others. And then you have ticket sales. It's just quite like a challenging part of the visual arts. And all of this tends to happen in like a gallery or museum setting. And so it's always quite like challenging, but then I find myself coming back to it every 3 or 5 years or so. Like I crave it in a way, or I feel like it's a necessary part of what I'm trying to express. Somewhere in my body, maybe like it's necessary. Yeah.
Does that satisfy the high energy girl that you were?
Possibly, yeah, possibly. I think like when I sculpt, like sculpting in glass, I think it also satisfies that in some way. Like there's a choreography to glass sculpting, right? It's in a way you memorize a choreography. And then when you do it correctly, you get rewarded, right? You get the dopamine hit and maybe you get a nice sculpture, right? That's the dopamine hit, right? Yeah.
Yes, because it's about movement, isn't it? I mean, glass is about, and what you're creating in those sculptures is about movement. So it makes sense those things all combine in your mind and in your sense of creativity. It becomes a bigger picture.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. And I feel like when I perform or when I practice like dancing, right? Like I do have a small dance practice. I wouldn't say I'm like a professional dancer, but I do enjoy this class called embodiment therapy. And basically it's like improv, and it's about finding what works in your body and like what feels good to move at the time. And I think that like both those things like relate, like the glass sculpting and the movement, right? Because then a lot of my sculptures they involve the body, right? And they involve like I sculpt a lot of like the female body, hands, arms, and I think that like the dancing, the movement part of it helps me imagine what I'm sculpting in some way. Yeah, that makes sense. It helps me work through what I'm making, and then the performance of sculpting, right? Of going through that choreography, like somehow like all of it materializes into like let's say a sculpture. And then sometimes the sculptures I feel aren't enough, right? I feel like when people walk into like my work, I want them to be able to walk into like what I'm thinking, like into my brain somehow. And there's a lot going on in there.
Well, it's a full body experience, isn't it? And I'm imagining this to tap into so many different senses. And it is a sensuous involvement too, isn't it, in creating those types of sculptures? I mean, I think any sculpture, but certainly with glass, there's something very mysterious about it too. So trying to draw the audience into that must be, for you, a full body experience where you're really exposing all of your senses.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, there are a lot of scents involved in glass blowing also, like the scent of beeswax, the scent of like paper burning. Like it's just an exciting thing. Like every time I get ready and I get ready to work, there's always this like sense of it being like a performance, like I'm scared.
Yes.
Right?
Nerves of anticipation of how this is going to play out.
Exactly. Like, will I break my work today? It's very exciting in that way. And of course, frustrating also in that way. Like, all summer long, I feel like I was cracking my work. Like I've been trying to work through like these forms, right? And, I want the forms to play music, but also to hold scent, right? So it's been just like trial and error and a lot of failing. And then finally last week, I feel like I had like a breakthrough of some sort. Like I'm finally getting somewhere and it's finally starting to feel good. Like, okay, it's been 3 months of cracking and breaking and failure. And so finally I feel like, okay, I think I figured out how to do it. So it's kind of like that high of like, oh, I'm so, you rehearse for like, let's say a play. You rehearse for a month, a few months, and then finally you get it. You got it. You got the choreography, and it feels good. And it feels good once in a while. So I think it is very sensuous in that way. It's so related to the body and like the performance of certain motions. And, once in a while you produce something that makes it to the kiln and it survives and you're happy with it. and that's a feeling I've been addicted to for quite a few years now.
Well, with that stimulation, of course, with that performance, the bigger picture, the dopamine hit, the high, I'm wondering, ultimately, though, Goldie, where is the satisfaction in this whole process for you? Is it during or at the final performance, or at the end of that final performance when you step away with a degree of satisfaction? Which is the high point for you?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Oh, well, it really feels like a relief when it's like done, like opening night done. Like, okay, this is done. The work it's in place. All the scent is in place. Or let's say after a performance and I'm on my way home. Ooh, that feels so good. That is the ultimate high, right? Like, oh, I did it.
Yeah.
Especially after like a performance, like let's say there are all these glass objects I sculpted and let's say they're props for the performance. And, I've worked like for months with another person, with 5 people or something to like make this performance. It's such a good feeling when it's done. But then I think I really do enjoy like this period that I'm in right now is when it's just me in the studio and I've been working towards something and I've been failing a lot, like failing miserably for like months. I've been working on this since March. I've been experimenting. And then after like 4 months or so, oh, I figured it out. Something's happening. And this feels good.
But is it failure? I mean, is that maybe being kind, not being really kind to yourself, are you, by calling it a failure? Because it isn't a failure; it's part of an experiment, isn't it? The whole process.
You're right.
Yeah. And then you're either collaborating, like you said, with that team of 5 other people. That is another energy as well. But then you come back to this solar energy that you have, being alone and being in that early, creative stage again. So maybe you're being a bit hard on yourself, considering that might be a failure. So can you think of it as something else?
Yeah, you're right. I do tend to be hard on myself. Eldest daughters, right?
Yeah.
But with glass, when something like quote unquote fails, like you're still learning something. It's true. And I don't think I would have been able to get to this point if I didn't go through like all those cracked like sculptures that I was making all summer long. Right. And so it is, it's kind of like being a scientist in a strange way. Like I keep a notebook and I log what I did, like what could have possibly gone wrong, right? Like why did that part crack? And then as I log in that information, then I hypothesize, like, what can I do differently next week, right? What can I do so that this sculpture doesn't break, so that this color works with this color, right? And so, you're right. Like they aren't failures. And in a way, like you do have to like fail forward sometimes, as I like to say, with glass. And I've been doing that. I've been working on it.
I would imagine it teaches you a lot of patience too.
Oh yes, Chris. Oh my goodness. If you only knew. Yeah. No, it can get frustrating sometimes. I mean, it's just, glass is like, especially when you want like vibrant colors, like sometimes glass colors are only available for a certain period of time. And if you crack certain colors, it can feel really like frustrating. So it really definitely tests your patience. Just like, you just have to show up again the next day and do it again. If your work like cracks or fails or it doesn't work out somehow. Yeah.
So in terms of your journey, Goldie, you clearly realized that it was going to be in the arts in some way, having graduated from the University of the Philippines in 2009, as we mentioned, and then you came to the States, to Rhode Island School of Design. Tell us about how that decision came about to choose that school.
Well, Chris, my undergrad was in painting, right? And that my thesis for that undergrad project was the perfume bar. And that was the first project I ever did in glass. And so what happened to me after that was I became addicted to learning glass sculpting. Like I just was like completely taken over by learning, by this desire to learn more. Right. So it sent me on like quite a journey. Like a gallerist saw my work, and the gallerist happened to be Italian. And she said, you should learn Italian because the best glass blowers are in Murano in Italy. And so I went to the Philippine Italian Association and I had studied like beginner's Italian. And then somehow I ended up like getting a scholarship to go to the Scuola Abate Zanetti in Murano. And I went, it was like a short beginner's workshop, right? And that's when I first saw furnace glass blowing. And at that workshop, I had American classmates who were also glass sculptors. And I remember just this sensation of being like, oh, wow, this is so hard, but it's so wonderful. I really wish I could do it more. And my American classmates told me that if you really want to learn glass blowing, then you should check out the Pilchuck Glass School in Seattle. And they told me that like they're so open to all different kinds of people there, and all different kinds of glass sculptors go there from all over the world. And so I had looked up Pilchuck, and this happened, I think, in 2012. And so from 2009 to 2012, I was working as an artist, right? I was lucky enough that my work was like gaining traction and I had a few shows. And I was working from a little glass studio that I had built in our house, in my parents' garage. But I knew that it wasn't enough, that my skills like weren't there yet and that there was more to learn. So like from 2009 to 2012, I had just like was working towards like learning Italian, right? And learning to be able to like seek out more glass education. So finally in 2012, I got a scholarship to go to Pilchuck. And my first teacher was Sally Prashk, who's one of the most amazing scientific glassblowers in the whole industry. And, it was a very like big moment for me. Like my parents took me there. They flew me to Seattle. They went with me. They rented a van and they were like, what are we doing here? Like to them, it was such a foreign place, just like so like strange. And Pilchuck is in like the middle of the woods of Seattle, right? It's like a 3-hour drive or something from like the main city of Seattle. And they were like, what are we doing here? Wow. Like it was just like fish out of water, right? But it was such a big moment. And like, I was so lucky that like my parents supported me and like they were like excited for me also. And, Pilchuck was run by Dale. It was founded by Dale Chihuly, who is one of the like biggest glass artists in America and in the world. And while I was at Pilchuck, they had these artist talks and people had described going to the MFA glass program at the Rhode Island School of Design, which was also founded by Dale Chihuly. And that was like when it just was like, okay, I know what I need to do. And so I went back home to Manila with like these new techniques that I had learned. And, I was still like putting out exhibitions, but then that was my goal. My goal was to like be accepted into the MFA glass program at the Rhode Island School of Design. And it was just like my biggest dream at the time. Like, I need to get into this. I need to get into this program. Like I was obsessed with it. And I had ordered like their catalog. And I was just like, oh, this is the place for me. Because it was really just like a place to experiment with glass and like glass in the context of contemporary art, right? Glass and just like this like world of contemporary art and what could that look like, right? And a lot of people I admired had gone to this school and just to be in a focused glass program for my MFA was just like the biggest dream. And like, wow, when I found out I got in, like, I couldn't even believe it. Like, I had applied to other schools, but then like, I remember like, it was just like, I was so scared to open my acceptance letter. And like, I had my mom look at it and she had to like read it to me. And I just like, couldn't believe it. Yeah. It was just like one of those moments in my life, right? Like core memory. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those really important milestones, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, for a girl like me from the Philippines, right, with like no glass programs at all, like it was just like I couldn't believe it, Chris.
So what was the experience like then? Was it everything you had hoped it would be?
Oh, that's another story. Oh my goodness. I mean, yes and no. To be a Filipino artist working in the Philippines is different to being a Filipino artist all of a sudden being transplanted like into like, the East Coast, like of New England in a graduate school program. It was definitely a very hard transition for me. I just wasn't used to being foreign and having to explain everything and just like the politics, right? The politics of America during that time were like intense. And so I just was a fish out of water. And although it wasn't exactly like what I hoped it would be in terms of like comfort, right? I was challenged and pushed to the ends of like, I didn't imagine that I would be challenged to that degree. I feel like I survived it in some way. Like I felt so challenged and so pushed in so many ways that like, I just know that I came out changed.
change, but for the better in terms of this is going to be my career, and I now have the credibility from the education I've achieved now that it will help me gain recognition professionally in the US as well, not just in Manila.
Yes, yeah, I think so. Yeah, it felt like a relief. I do think that. Yeah, it just boy, was it different. Yeah.
And you really were, playing with the grown-ups, as they say now.
Yeah, yeah, playing with all the big boys. Yeah. Everyone with a similar goal as me, right? And also, I mean, it was that way in the Philippines, except when I felt like they understood like the context of the work and the background of the work more in some way, like, oh yeah, that's what she was referring to. And then when I moved, when I was like, fresh off the boat, it was like, okay, they don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah. I have to be able to convey like what I want to convey, but also I need to introduce my culture to them. It was more of that transition.
Who would have been your mentors? Were there women?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Jocelyn Prince was my advisor. Rachel Berwick was the head of the glass department during my time. And so many amazing people in the glass department that were women. Yeah, also so good. So I was so lucky to be around people that like pushed me, inspired me, challenged me. Yeah, but were also like inspiring and just motivated me and really like showed me like it's possible. Like a career in the arts in this way is possible. Yeah, you just have to work for it, I guess.
So you graduated feeling empowered and confident now that you could launch yourself in the US and make a living out of it.
Yeah. I mean, it still is uphill. I mean, I feel like there are a lot of challenges for all kinds of artists, right? But I moved to New York when I graduated, and I did feel empowered. I did feel like I had a whole set of skills, and the city has a way. New York City has a way of challenging you, right? And so that was a whole other set of learning and learning how to make it work, so they say, right?
So what was the social Goldie doing during this time, in college? And were you into the music scene? Were you carrying on from your punk band days, enjoying music? And were you dating? What kind of fun were you having as well?
Oh my goodness. Well, I did have more of like the time to be in a band, I think, when I was in the Philippines, because I was a first year, art student. I mean, I could have had better grades then, but then when I was in grad school, I felt that it was more challenging, but I was able to inject the music into the performance art aspect of it. So I had worked with musicians for a lot of projects that I presented when I was in grad school. And what's funny is I had no time to date, no time for socials really, except for with my colleagues and my roommates. But somehow, because I craved it, I think that's when I started to be like interested in this idea of performance art. And then like you can choose electives, right, when you're in grad school. So I picked performance art for one of them, and then film for one of them. So, I was like making all these videos where I was like performing in the videos. And then I was asking my musician friends to come collaborate with me to translate scent into music. So I had found little sneaky ways of still playing music and doing things I enjoyed in a different way, right? And then when I graduated, that was when I met my husband now. Yeah, which is why I'm still here. Yeah.
That's Joseph, of course. What does Joseph do?
Joseph is a financial advisor, but he also plays drums. So, he, the first time we met, our date was like we played music together. So I thought that was nice.
Immediate harmony.
Yeah, I would say so. We were connected by our interest in like playing music together, I think. Yeah.
So when did you get married?
I got married in 2017.
And where was that?
I got married in City Hall in New York. So like close to Chinatown. Just a typical City Hall wedding. My parents were here for that, and one of my brothers was able to come, and an uncle of mine. So that was really nice.
How close are you with your family now, being so far away? How often do you get to see them and spend time?
Oh, yeah. Well, I try to go home as often as possible, and I try to inject work into this. So I try to go home like once every 2 years or once every year, depending on like my schedule, my work schedule. And I try to call my parents every day. So I would say that we're pretty close. But of course, it's hard, right? It's hard to just like be on like FaceTime. And it's always better like when we're in, like together in person. So like I'm lucky now that I have a lot of shows in Asia planned out. And when that happens, I get to see them. So that's sort of how I try to structure my yearly schedule as I inject time in for them. Yeah.
Let's just talk about the music again, because you sent me your playlist, and I'm wondering what is the soundtrack to your life, really? Where do you feel your heart and soul is with music now?
Well, before we spoke, I was listening to Miles Davis' greatest hits. So I kind of feel like I want to be in this place of like feeling like one of Miles Davis's songs, like I'm cruising, like a jazz improv somehow. Like I think like in my earlier like 20s, like especially when I was first starting out with Glass, I felt that I really had to like play hard and run really hard and like work really, really, really hard to get to where I had to go, right? To get a scholarship, you have to like work really hard, right? And I feel like now I'm entering this phase of like trying to not be so like stressed out about like the opinions of others after the work comes out, and to just try to make something that I like, if that makes sense.
So outside of your work as an artist and being a wife, what are your priorities? How do you like to spend time?
Oh, I love to prioritize spending time with my family. And, it's harder because they're in the Philippines. So I wait all year long, or I wait years sometimes to see them. But when that's not possible, right? Like I feel like I value a lot of like I don't know, like inner work, if that makes sense, like self-care in some way. I know it's an overused word, but I value a lot of like time where I can reflect, like time to journal, time to just spend by myself and to figure out like where I'm at and what I have to do to like be inspired, like in the studio, and to be happy, like just to philosophize on how like what's working, right? Like how can I be a happy person? Yeah. I love exercising. Yeah, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Sure. And do you still love reading?
Oh yes, yeah. I love reading. I do love reading. I would say that's one of my hobbies. I borrow a lot of books from the library. It's nice to have time for that. Obviously, like I don't always have time to read, but it's nice to be like in a place where I have time to enjoy a novel.
And I'm thinking, the movement in your work, where might you get that kind of inspiration? Is it from dancing? Do you watch dance performances or film? Is there any type of genre that appeals to you where you can, sit back and in digest, I guess, the inspiration that this might give you?
Yeah, I love a good film. I also love going to the Met. I love going to the Met and looking at the Renaissance sculptures. And I love like I'm a very visual person. So anything like, yeah, a film that like is amazing. I love like the Pina Bausch as a dancer. Like she has this great film that you can watch. I think it's on Amazon, where they're like dance films. and they're just like they're so beautiful. A lot of music inspires me too, but I think, movement and music, like I always work with music. I would say that music is a part of my everyday life more than like film is.
Do you play an instrument now?
I play the guitar. Yeah, not as often as I'd like. Sometimes me and my old bandmate, our old drummer lives in New York City also, and sometimes we rent out a room and we just like pretend we're still in our band.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, but then not as often as I'd like.
So tell us more about the shows that you have coming up, Goldie, in Asia.
Well, I'm working towards what I now think. I think the contract is about to be signed, but I will be working on a piece for the art fair in the Philippines this year, and that happens in February. And it's a piece that I've been conceptualizing for a year now, or for 2 years now, I guess. Time flies. It's a piece about the oil spill in the Philippines that happened in the Verde Island Passage. And it's an area of the world that is the most diverse in terms of corals and shallow sea life. And so 2 years ago, there was an oil spill there. And I thought, I thought that I would like look into it. And so I worked with the Biodiversity Management Bureau in the Philippines to find out which species are essential and endangered to that area. So I've been working on sculpting these species of coral and also of invertebrates. So I've been fascinated with sea slugs because they've been evolving in a very interesting way in this area. And it shows that they're resilient. So these corals actually and these mollusks are actually very resilient through like oil spills and whatever else, mankind throws at them. So I've been working on a piece about that. And I'm working on the performance aspect of this piece. So I'm collaborating with a perfumer named M. Doherty and a few sound artists, Arvin Nogueras, Erwin Romulo, and Ben Richter from Massachusetts. So hopefully this all happens, right? We're working on creating an interactive experience that brings you to the depths of the sea somehow and shows you like the strange beauty of the ocean. Yeah.
Well, that's a lot to look forward to. And I'm really inspired by, a lot of the women that have inspired you as well. And some of those names that you shared with me were Janine Antoni and Agnes Saralano, Jonas, Camille Claudel, of course, inspires everyone, and Kiki Smith. To just give us an idea of what it is that feeds you from their work.
Oh, their sense of just like shameless, I don't know, their sense of like shameless, like just being a woman, like a woman as a sculptor, like they're sculptors and they're women. And you can see that in their work, right? Like just like the grace and the beauty of like their sculptures. Just when you look at their work, it's almost as if you're looking at who they are. Like you can see who they are without even knowing them. And let's say Janine Antoni's work, Lick and Lather, and just like how that relates to the body, how she used like those sculptures and how she performed, how she ate the sculptures made of chocolate and the lather part of having that made of soap and just how that relates to the body. Right. And with Camille Claudel and like how, how as a woman in her industry, like how her work like stood up to just the men of her time, right? Just the technique.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right? Like that, just the strength of that inspires me. Just like, like she was good, and nobody can deny that she was good. Right?
Absolutely.
And,
yes.
Right? Just that inspires me a lot. Just like
once we realized it was her.
Yeah. Just like, oh, wait a minute. And I didn't learn about her till like later in life. Like when you read the books, it's always the men that you learn about, like that you learn about first. And then I learned about her when I was able to visit the Rodin Museum. Oh my gosh, I was just so inspired by her work. I think I even like her work more. So just that. Yeah, it keeps me going, right? I idolize them.
Do you feel that you are where you are supposed to be, where you want to be? You're in a happy place now, creatively.
Well, yes, I would say I'm quite lucky. I'm grateful. If you spoke to me a month ago, I might have been frustrated. As I mentioned, like all my stuff was breaking all summer long. But we also had a heat wave in New York, so it was also quite challenging to work in the studio all summer. So I think that played a part, right? With the frustration and just like the heat wave and working with glass in a heat wave, it just all played its part. Like I was irritated, I was frustrated. But now I feel like, even despite that, I feel like to be able to even just say that, like to work in the studio, that's such a gift, right? I feel like I'm so lucky to be able to do this profession. Just like, I feel like I am in a good place just to be able to still do this, right? In New York, like it definitely, like when I started in New York, I couldn't blow glass as often as I'd like. So, I work part-time, I work odd jobs just to be able to like have that time in the studio. And so I'm so grateful now for whatever time I have, like just the schedule I have now. Like I'm so, so grateful that I can do this.
Well, you've certainly checked a lot of boxes already, Goldie. So what's left on the bucket list?
Oh my.
Perhaps where you would like to have shows.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I mean, of course, I dream of all the typical like big places in New York, right? Like to have a big solo show in New York would be amazing. Anywhere, really, a big space. But I think that like just to have, I think my next goal would be to have a bigger studio. Right now, I work in a shared studio, which I mean is common for people in glass, right? It's very hard to have a glass studio. But for the technique that I specialize in, flame working, I think that it wouldn't be impossible. So I think a goal of mine would be to have a bigger, like to work bigger, to put it simply in that way, right? Like to make my work bigger.
Says every artist.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. Until the day they die. Like, I wonder what else I could do.
Exactly. You continue to explore your potential, Goldie. There's so much ahead, I'm sure, for you. Your work is so fascinating, so lovely to enjoy and immerse ourselves into just by being part of that experience. So thank you for sharing such wonderful work, and thank you for sharing your time so graciously and being on the show this week. It's been lovely to talk to you.
Likewise, Chris, thank you so much.
And if you scroll down the show notes, you'll find a link to Goldie's website and also to her Instagram, where you'll also find a link to our Instagram as well. So I hope you'll join us there and post your comments and questions, suggestions for guests too. Or you can email us directly to hollowellstudios@gmail.com. And as always, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, we'd love it if you would leave us a 5-star rating and a review, because that improves our rankings and then therefore helps others find the show. And if you know anyone who would enjoy listening to this show, please do share the episode on your podcast app. My thanks again to my guest this week, Goldie Poblador, and to you for listening. I'll be back next week when my guest will be the artist Victoria Obolensky. So I do hope you'll join me then.